harbors and whatever, you really do need to use exact depths. And I think if you go out and you look at that with depth finders, you will find that what's on the navigational charts is not always 100% accurate, and that anyone with a depth finder on their boat would be able to do that. I don't know if the harbor master has access to that, but basically they're a lot of fishermen and whatever have them on their boats now, where they're looking because they're looking for fish and whatever, and they could easily get the depth. And a lot of folks who are, so that they don't get caught in these channels that need to be dredged, have these on their boats as well. So it's a fairly common tool to be able to figure out exactly the depth in that channel. So it's not something that should be hard to do. I would think probably even somebody installing moorings may actually have that as well. One of the things I think you'll find in that channel is that where it says 2 feet may not be correct. So just using the navigational maps, I would think the harbor master would know that those are not always as accurate and should not be the tool that we use. We always, and the same thing in land use, we don't just look at maps in terms of where the survey boundary is. Then we have to go physically out in the field and say, here's where the survey is and this is what's actually in the field. And that's just pretty common standard practice. I also want to say, in terms of using GPS and location out in the field, sometimes I know it gets frustrating, but sometimes, depending on what's going on, and the accuracy of your GPS and the strength of the signal, you can get misinformation. So it's not always correct just going out and saying like, oh, I can easily do a GPS. There are times when your signal gets jammed, you get miscoordinates and whatever. So that's pretty common. So even though we should be able to get the resolved, and I agree with Ms. Ahmad that it's very simple, that if someone's picking up a marker and moving it, they should be able to know where they're picking it up from, and should probably, since that's the area we're discussing where we want the mooring to go, could have easily taken coordinates there and see how they match up. So but I just wanted to let people know that, because I've done some of the work. We've got GPS coordinate GPS equipment here with for our GIS department that we actually use out in the field. So like if I'm locating osprey nests, or actually like we were doing some work with the Shellfish Commission and looking at marking the shellfish beds and whatever, you can actually use those. So we have that equipment that we can use if we need to make those determinations.
Thank you. Great, Denise, thank you again for your professional judgment. And yeah, I think if you could, Ms. Ahmad, one of the requests I would have is for, obviously Mr. Zubek's going to seek a vendor to get the coordinates, but I mean the harbor master should produce, in fact, where he removed the
lobster pot.
The pot from. He should be able to tell us that. I mean, that's as Ms. Savagel points out, I mean, that's a fact. I mean, where was it?
Right.
Yeah. All right.
So.
Yeah.
Our goal is to get this done by snowfall for the next.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there any?
He needs to come back with.
I'm going to locate my mooring area and put a marker back. I really need for you to instruct Mr. McMillan not to not to move it again, or we're lost again. Can you do that?
Well, this is in a public domain, and there are a number of people in attendance, media included. I think I would ask our assistant town attorney to convey that message in a civil and proper way to adjudicate a matter. And again, if I think it's not adhered to, it's another testament to the individual's behavior as to not wanting to cooperate. It's the best way I could put it in most. Okay, so new business, we have no new business. Under item number 6, appointments and nominations, we first have a professional staff position that has been vacant. That position has been the Deputy Commissioner of Public Works. Dave Thompson retired earlier this year after many years of good service to the citizens of the town. The Department of Public Works has worked closely with the Department of Human Resources to post the position and to interview several candidates. There was a interview panel. I believe, Mr. Brannion, you were part of that panel, as well as Mrs. DeLuca, and perhaps was there someone else, or just? And of course, well, you're a given, of course. You're the commish, as they call you. You're the commish. But we were ably assisted by two of our top senior professionals. And so before us today is a recommendation from the commissioner for the board to confirm, per charter, James Michel to the position of Deputy Commissioner of Public Works at a starting salary of $133,000 annually, effective immediately. The position of Deputy Commissioner of Public Works is a non-represented unclassified position allocated to the managerial confidential class level 9 salary range. The town, in accordance with the town's managerial and confidential compensation plan, shall determine future salary considerations. So to give a little bit of background, Mr. Michel has served as the Town of Greenwich Department of Public Works Chief Engineer since January 2011. As Chief Engineer, Mr. Michel plans and directs all activities of DPW's engineering division, providing in-house design, project management, and engineering assistance to other divisions, departments, boards, and agencies. Mr. Michel manages the development and implementation of major capital improvement programs with an annual budget of $5 to $10 million. From 1995 to 2010, Mr. Michel worked in the private sector in the civil engineering field. His focus areas included land development, stormwater management, and traffic design. He worked with both private and municipal clients. Mr. Michel was also an active business manager as he was a partner in a small consulting firm serving the Chicago suburbs. He brought organizational and information technology skills developed in that role to the department when he joined. Mr. Michel graduated with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the University of Illinois and a Master's of Business Administration from the Keller Graduate School. Mr. Michel completed the American Public Works Association Engineering Leaders Academy in 2014. Additionally, Mr. Michel is licensed with the state of Connecticut as a professional engineer. The search process began in May of 2015. The top most qualified 4 candidates were interviewed, and Mr. Michel was selected. So again, Ms. Siebert, would you like to comment? Because this is your recommendation to us.
That's right. So what I can just say for you folks today is I think Jim will be a very good candidate. I mean, we know him in the department. You folks know him as well. He's done a lot of very good work for us. So we're looking forward to that. And he's sorry he couldn't be here because he's actually out at that West COG meeting doing good work for us now, so that we don't have to be there.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of just a quick one.
Great, thank you. And I would say, in complimenting you, that you have done a nice job of identifying and bringing well-qualified people to your department, and I think it's served the town well in all areas, both professionally and in their personal skills.
We have to thank Human Resources for that, too, as well. They've been very helpful.
Great.
I want to thank Katie and Ben, because that was very helpful as well.
Yes, thank you. So at this time, I'd like to make a motion for the resolution. The Board of Selectmen appoint James Michel to the position of Deputy Commissioner of Public Works. It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Congratulations.
And congratulations, yes, Jim. We have been working through the remaining board and commission positions over the last several months. We have several to complete, notably the Witherell. We still have the Housing Authority, which is a direct appointment. And today we are going to be taking up Witherell, and I believe we'll be taking up Planning and Zoning. In terms of Planning and Zoning, obviously we have one opening in the regular member position, having 3 individuals essentially being considered for this position. Whomever is nominated still has to garner approval by the representative town meeting. So in terms of process of filling the alternate I think we have learned from past experience that we will not fill the alternate position until such time as the regular position is filled, because we cannot presume the outcome of the deliberation. So we'll be running, and I say that, Katie, in a sense, because we're trying to keep you well-staffed, but sequencing is always an issue with this. And we've had this issue with where we learned it very, perhaps, what's the word? The School of Hard Knocks with wetlands. I think we had that where we elevated someone, but then they weren't activated on, and so. So that being said, at this time I will entertain any motions.
I move that Andrew Fox be moved up to a regular membership on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Mr. Fox lives at 50 Fairfield Road. He was appointed in October 2013 as an alternate member with a filling out Fred Brooks's term to 3/14. He was reappointed to 3/2017, March 2017. Mr. Fox has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. He has 32 years in the field of building and developing. He has been the chair of the Nathaniel Woodrow Building Committee. He was the chair of the Eagle Hill Building Committee. He was instrumental in the expansion of the Greenwich Country Day. He has an appreciation of the need for historic presentation, and I think he'll be a good addition to the regular membership on the Planning and Zoning.
Okay, thank you. The name of H. Andrew Fox has been moved. I will second that nomination. And for purpose of discussion, and we'll say that we have an abundance of riches in some respects, and that we had before us 3 individuals who have been serving for varying durations of time as alternate members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Each brings to the table very specific skills. In Mr. Fox, we have an engineer who has contributed greatly to the improvement of several both public and private enterprises in the town. We have Ms. Ramer, who is a very renowned attorney and a civic volunteer who has devoted several years to the commission and getting an integral knowledge of the regulations. And we have Mr. McRae, whom is our most recent member, whom has served, which I did not realize until meeting with him, almost 14 years on the Architectural Review Committee, which is an advisory position to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So in many respects, whomever advances forward is capable and able to contribute more fully as a regular member. For me, it really came down to the timing, and at this time, in my judgment, as an individual member of the board, I believe Mr. Fox can lend himself to some of the work that the commission is doing, particularly related to regulation review and an application of review that our new town planner has undertaken to address many of the concerns that residents have brought forth. And I've really agonized over this, but as I sat back and I went through and looked at the work that the Economic Advisory Committee was doing and raising, a number of the concerns centered around process in the regulations and the unintended consequence of those regulations. And I think based upon his experience working with several of these large projects on a public level and privately working in the industry, he could perhaps be of value in the short term as you work to bring this forward. This is a very difficult decision in that all 3 are wonderful individuals, and certainly I anticipate we'll be moving forward in the future as we see other vacancies.
Mr. Chairman, is here. It's extensive. I do have some prepared remarks in regards to this nomination.
Well, there's one motion on the floor. He moved it. It's seconded. So we have to adjudicate that motion first, but you certainly can comment on.
Sure. if you can. Mr. Chairman, Selectman Toner, what should be, in my opinion, a routine appointment to the Planning and Zoning Commission, arguably one of the most powerful, influential boards in Greenwich, has now, at minimum, alters the mechanism in which, for years, if not decades, guided the selectmen in determining what alternate member will be next promoted to a full member. Now, while I fully understand and agree that the executive board, the Board of Selectmen, should reserve the right to nominate who each individual selectman thinks is the right person at the right time that will contribute in the most positive way. With that said, however, unless there is a compelling reason, one based on verifiable facts, that for reason not to promote an alternate member next in line, then I do think the question of precedence should take place here. Nancy Ramer, who has commanded the respect of the commission itself, her constituents that she serves, elected officials, elected leadership, Nancy has committed herself to being the best board member she could possibly be, and that is evident by the quantitative, documented amount of hours, hundreds, that she has demonstrated in work. So again, I will say this should be a routine appointment, that this board should be following routine past precedents and procedure. I ask that this board take into consideration my comments and advocacy for Ms. Ramer, and also ask this board consider the negative impact of not promoting a qualified, diligent, respected member of the commission. She is respected by all, like I said, both Democrats, Republicans, and independents. So, Mr. Chairman, if this board, or Mr. Chairman and Mr. Toner, if this board does deviate from past practice without, in my opinion, a valid reason, other boards could face the possibility of a cast of shadow subject to, in some case, in politics, could be subject to lobbying, whether or not someone wants this person or not this person. In fact, this other boards could be subject to various chair people wanting, for their reasons, a person that they deem fit. So I believe we should follow precedents and follow process that, especially this board, has been doing so as long as I've been here for 6 years. Nancy Ramer has earned this promotion and nomination. And with that, normal, routine process and precedents should be followed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you, and very passionate and well articulated. Further discussion, any comments? Yes, certainly.
I'm not used to being on this side.
Well, welcome. We always like to see you.
You have to identify yourself.
My name is Margarita Albin. I was aware of it usually being based on seniority as an alternate, and I'm having a hard time with this because I have every confidence in this Board of Selectmen, and I can only remind you that the last time that a woman was up to move from alternate to regular, a very similar issue came up, and another person was moved forward, and there was a great deal of drama over it, and the woman finally became a regular, and that woman was me. And that was the last time we had a woman that came up. And I'm wondering why it is that for so long we only had one woman, another woman is about to come up, and she gets pushed out of the way. As Mr. Marzullo said, these are all 3 good candidates. I don't see why Nancy, given her seniority, how hard she's worked, would not be moved forward. And it disturbs me that this precedent exists. I would understand if you chose to move a Republican forward, because Mr. Brooks is a Republican, and I believe you would be able to place another Republican. But bypassing that, and again, our protocol, the precedent we've had, especially because you are looking at 3 good people who will in time move as is appropriate. And I guess that's it. I thought it was, initially, when they were going to pass me by, I thought it was because I was a minority, but now I'm wondering. So I'm disturbed by it. Again, I trust you guys. I know you're all great and very responsible, and I know you followed good process. But my heart's broken. And I don't know what I'll do with
Yeah.
it.
Well, I certainly will appreciate your comments. I happen to disagree in terms of some of the tone that you've interjected into it, because we nominate hundreds of people over the course of our time, and I think ultimately it is a judgment.
And my experience is only on planning and
Right,
zoning. you
and
know
so
that.
just in terms of the conversation about what is precedent or process, I mean, it really has been a practice, but it is not a requirement. And again, and when you come down to, we talk about elected boards, competition for elected boards, what is the authorities? Ultimately, every person who steps forward has to make a series of judgments at a given time. No question, this is a difficult decision because personally, I like all three people. In fact, I nominated Mrs. Ramer the last time and was very proud to do so. And I say that with all candor and seriousness because I have profound respect for her. It is a matter of timing in terms of Andy has devoted himself now to wanting to help address some of these issues related to regulation improvement. As a regular member, in my judgment, perhaps he can facilitate more readily as a full-time member. We're talking about a period of essentially 7 months. If you think about the process of appointment, he still has to go to the RTM. That won't happen until September. So theoretically, he won't really be seated until October. Now we go full circle into next year, presuming whoever's sitting here, the folks on the P&Z will be, that Board of Selectmen will determine who will replace Mr. Heller, who has very much publicly said he's not continuing. So if that next board opts to, they can nominate in January. The RTM most likely will not act until March. So theoretically, April 1st, the next regular member will be seated. So it's really a question of timing. Back to this issue, should seniority as a practice weigh out over what our judgments are and skills? I don't think it's anything more than that, and so I disagree with your
Yeah.
other assertion.
I didn't realize that Mr. Fox was interested in regulations. We have a group now that's working on regulations, and Mr. Fox had not become part of that. Mr. Maitland and Mrs. Ramer are.
Can I comment on that too? Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, it's more about than seniority. But like I said before, unless there is a valid reason, in my opinion, not to appoint a member in, fantastic standing that does have seniority, then we are deviating for past practice. And the assumption is that, I heard from my two colleagues that Andy, about regulation improvement. The assumption is, how I'm hearing this, that somehow Nancy's not. And I've talked about that during my interview as well. I mean, so I don't know if that's
Nancy's
the...
very actively
there's no
involved in that.
Question about that. I mean, in terms of, as I said, she's a renowned attorney. No question about her aptitude in looking at the regulations and finding ways to make improvements or clarity. That's one skill set. Mr. Fox is, as I see, and I had an opportunity to talk to him after I spoke with Mrs. Ramer the other day, and then subsequently talked to Mr. McRae as part of our interview process. Mr. Fox has actually had practical experience dealing with them, and so I think that's a judgment in terms of which are you going to apply sooner versus later. I mean, it's simply it's a simple judgment.
And then I would have, well, it's your call, and you guys are the people who run the town, and I'm just saying, I realize that all three people are very competent. Nick has huge experience, practical experience, working with regulations. He would, and Nancy always comments on how stuff isn't in English, and we got to get it so that it's simpler for people to follow, and she's been actively working on the more complex ones. So of the people that I've been working with, of the alternates, the two that have really been active in the regulation side to date have been Mr. McRae and Mrs. Ramer. Again, I don't see the whole picture, and I understand that, but it is, what can I tell you? I feel like I feel.
No, I appreciate it, and I admire your work, too. You dedicated a lot of time as well. And that's the other thing, too, that we have to take into consideration, as all three of these individuals will ultimately advance into regular positions. Notably, I said Mr. Heller, we know for certainty, is going to not be seeking reappointment. He has said that. We'll need an alternate. All of the alternates at some point have been elevated up. I don't know the intentions of the other people, but we know that in terms of tenure, 16, Mr. Heller's up,
I'm up.
you're up, and then we go into, this position actually isn't even for a full 3 years, because it's actually filling Mr. Brooks's term, which is in 17, whereas whom goes into Mr. Heller's seat will be going in for 3 years. Do you know what I mean? So in a way, this is a partial term. Mr. Heller's will be a full 3-year term, based upon what our advisory committee tells us.
You know, I'm concerned, like I said, about precedents and whatnot, but that aside, I mean,
I'll go sit down now.
I'm concerned about precedents too, but that aside, as the chairman said, there's an opportunity here to my two colleagues to rethink this. If it is only 7 minutes, 7 months or 6 months, then we should be following precedents, and we should be promoting a well-respected member on both sides, when in fact, we're going to be, Andy or whoever will be back in front of this board again in 6 or 7 months anyway. That's the point. Why are we deviating when in 6 months down the road?
It's basically, that's the ultimate, it's the judgment as sort of
And I'm
timing.
imploring my two colleagues to really think this out, because this is not, I'll say this is not just about this appointment. So once again, I implore my two colleagues on the other side here to rethink this.
But, thank you. I have no other comment.
Nancy, do you want to speak or no? No? No.
Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded to appoint Mr. Fox to a term that would expire on 3/31 of 17. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Me.
So the motion is carried 2-1. Mr. Rosen, you will be notifying the RTM in accordance with the process of interviewing and so forth. The next item before us, Mr.